the work that we're working on, and then we will go ahead and get to our main event tonight. You know, we're coming off a lot of holidays, and so we thought that this would be a topic that many people would be interested in this evening. It's from previous surveys, mental health has been one of the top five topics that people want to learn about. And so, as we're kicking off the new year, we thought it would be great for those who are non-smokers. If you know someone who smokes, it will help us to be supportive of them in their journey if they're interested in no longer smoking. And if you are a smoker, we want you to know that there are resources and tools out there to help you on your journey to not smoke. Um,
All good?
good, good.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
All right, I am going to mute. We know that there's no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. There's an immediate reaction, and the majority of people are non-smokers. One of the things that we wanted to share with you tonight when we are working on promoting smoke-free multi-unit housing is how smoking can impact people who live in multi-unit housing. So it can go through the vents, it can go through the airways, the electrical outlets, and also it can go through windows and patios. And unincorporated Sacramento County, we don't have a ordinance that prevents smoking. And it puts some of our seniors, our pets, and our children that are non-smokers, more than 250,000 of them are affected every year by secondhand smoke and puts them at increased risk for more respiratory problems, heart disease. And we also see in children, we see more SIDS and we see more visits to the emergency room. I'm going to share with you a video from two residents that live in smoke-free, that live in housing where smoking is allowed, and it shows how allowing smoking impacts them. Stop sharing.
I'm Brenda, and I live in Sacramento. I've been in Sacramento for over 20 years, and I would love to live in a smoke-free environment.
I'm Therese, and I've lived in Sacramento all my life, and living in a smoke free environment is my goal. It has been quite trying. There's times when I can't even go in certain parts of the house because the smoke is so bad. It's just really in your face. For example, if I have to go to the bathroom, I have to go to the one upstairs because if I go in the one downstairs, I'll end up in a coughing fit, and sometimes it gets to the point where I throw up. It's really bad. And I can't go on her patio pretty much at all as long as they're out there. It's been really just trying on my mental state because now I have to up my breathing treatments because my asthma has gotten a little bit worse. It went from just the basic inhaler to now I'm on steroids, both pills and the steroid inhaler. And then, like I said, the breathing treatments as well. So it's depressing.
Where I live, I do have neighbors that do come out on their patio, and unfortunately, their upstairs patio is right across from my upstairs patio. So when they're out and they're smoking out there, they smoke cigarettes, they smoke marijuana out there, and while they're out there smoking, it's drifting over into my bedroom because their bedrooms patio, they're the bedrooms, the patios off of the bedrooms. So that's how it gets into my bedroom. When I come over, it means Therese want to go on the patio, but we can't because the neighbors are outside smoking. We both have asthma, so we can't go out there because I would just only aggravate it. We used to see each other and say, "Hey, how you doing?" or whatever. It's a hostile living environment now. It's hostile, very
Wow.
hostile. They don't speak to each other anymore. Um, it's hostile because of the manager that's there, which is turn on fans, and like I said, just block the put a towel under the door and basically just stay in. I mean, I don't know what else to do, you know. And they said when I did complain to the manager, we got a 60-day notice. We had to get an attorney through the city. The city stepped in and renters' rights, and the letter that they gave me, that they served me, wasn't even legal. They were just hoping that I would just pack up and just leave. It was, and everything still go back the way it was, you know. And either way, even if I do decide, okay, that's it, I've had enough, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna move or whatever, and just pay the rent or whatever, whoever moves in there is still gonna have the same problem. It's still gonna be the same problem, and it's never gonna be resolved.
Anyone that has asthma, it's really rough out there for us. And we all want to strive towards a smoke free living environment so we can live comfortably and happily.
So as you can see, smoke-free housing is something that is important and can affect many people. And so that's something that we want to promote. But we're also concerned that during this time period, as people get stressed, oftentimes smoking is a habit that they turn to. And so we wanted to take this time to offer a presentation that would help people to deal with some of the stress as we're starting this new year. It gives us that, sorry, TA going on here. A little bit of information on the why we thought this was important. We know that stress and anxiety, particularly daily pressures, increase smoking, vaping, and secondhand smoke exposure, especially in the African American community that are often hooked on menthol. We know that mental health, stress management, and tobacco-free living are deeply connected. When that stress goes up, so does reliance on these harmful coping behaviors. So we want to promote healthier behaviors. And by addressing mental health and self-care, we strengthen our ability to live, worship, and gather in spaces that are safe, healthy, and smoke-free. So our overall goal is truly to empower the community with knowledge and strategies that support both mental well-being and smoke-free, stress-free living. And with that, we are really glad to have Dr. Tiffany Mims with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Flechette to introduce Dr. Mims.
Hold on just a minute. Oh boy, I'm so sorry. Dr. Mims is one of my favorite folks, you all, so I got to do this right. Let me see. Okay, what's happening?
And Plachette, I also don't mind introducing myself.
No, Dr. Mims. I'm so
This is
sorry, everyone. Thank you for being patient. Dr. Tiffany Mims is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified life and executive coach, and founder of the Rosetta Center for Counseling and Wellness in Sacramento. With over 20 years of experience, she specializes in trauma, burnout, racial oppression, and the mental well being of African American women and girls. Her work spans hospitals, schools, universities, nonprofits, and private practice. Dr. Mims is widely known for her dynamic, culturally grounded approach to helping individuals create meaningful, balanced, and healthier lives. She is also a certified professional organizer and passionate advocate for mental wellness in Black communities. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Mims. We are so glad to have you with us today.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you. Yeah, I probably would not have said all of that. So thank you for the introduction. I am so happy to be with you all this evening. Some of you haven't seen in quite a bit, so this is great. And I really appreciated the introductory, video and information. I so appreciated that you looked at sort of both sides of, the issue, right? Because it is important for us to know the way in which our communities are impacted by smoke and the importance of smoke-free environments. But it's also important to ground this conversation in an understanding of the challenges that folks that are utilizing smoking, right, to deal with stress. So I really appreciate you looking at, right, the whole picture. So let me see here. I am going to share my screen. And I mentioned earlier that, okay, wait a second here. I have a new computer, and so I hope I can figure this out. Okay, so far it's working. We'll say allow that. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. And let me move this out of the way. Okay. All right. Now that's the whole screen there. Okay. All right. And then let me see here. All right. So my view on Zoom is only showing me a few folks at a time. So what I'm going to ask for is a little bit of support for any questions or anything that might come up in the chat because my current settings aren't allowing me to see a whole lot. So I am very flexible in my presentation style. So I do not mind people just unmuting, asking a question, especially since, I can't see the chat and hands being raised. So if someone would kind of, help me manage that, I would appreciate it. All right.
All right.
Okay, perfect. So with that, let's dive in. So I was asked to speak on how to build a self-care, smoke-free, stress-free space. And let me just tell you, wow, that is a big, full topic, right? I mean, each of those components on their own could be their own workshop, their own, course, really. I mean, self-care, so much a part of that. Smoke free. I mean, that is really an area that we can go into depth on, and stress free, right? Stress alone. So a very, very broad topic. And I also know that some other titles went out to folks. So I hope that what I say still fits into what you were hoping to hear this evening, one. And if not, again, I am open to questions, comments, discussion, if there's something in particular that you wanted to cover this evening. Okay? All right. All right. So, what I'm really hoping to do, given it's such a broad topic and such an important topic, is to really demonstrate the connection, just like Valerie mentioned earlier, right? This connection between stress, self care, and smoking behaviors. Now, there's going to be a strong focus on talking about stress, right? What that is, different stressors that we experience, what it could look like. And what I would really hope is that each of you would increase your own awareness of what stress looks like for you, right? Because it's a very individual experience. Like there's community stress and things that we experience together, but the way in which one, copes with the stress, manages the stress, how it kind of shows up is very individual. And if we're not aware of our own signs and symptoms and causes of stress, we're less likely to be effective in addressing it, in preventing it, managing it, etc. Okay. And then lastly, to really encourage you to develop your own personalized self-care plan that reduces stress, that supports you across all of the spaces in your life in general, and in particular in becoming stress-free. Okay. So, to get us on the same page and to sort of lay some of the groundwork here, all right, so when we think about self-care, right, what comes up for you? I mean, there's a lot of buzzwords about self-care. Self-care is very trendy in a lot of ways, but do we really know what self-care is, right? And so here's a definition there: intentional practice of taking actions to promote your own well being. Now, that's a very dense definition, but if you really look at it, each of those components is important. Okay. Intentional. That means you've thought about it. You've thought about what really works for me, what helps me to pour into myself, what helps me manage my stress. So it's intentional. We think about it. It's not something that's an afterthought. It's not something that we fit in when we can, which if we don't plan for it, for most of us, it's not going to happen, right? We prioritize self-care when we're being intentional, okay? And it's a practice. It's something that we do what? Regularly, okay? It's not every now and then, or if we, are forced to, right? Anyone has a situation when you're forced to slow down, to stop doing so much, right? We intentionally think about it and we carry out actions on a regular basis that promote our well-being, okay? So promoting, okay, it helps, not hinders, right? And it helps who? You. And I have to point that out because, I work a lot with Black women, professional Black women, and so many of the things that we do, really the beneficiary are other people, right? But how often do we think about the actions that are good just for us? If other people benefit, fine, great, bonus. But really, the focus on what is it that I need for me, solely for me, that really has nothing to do with other folks, right? That's a critical component of self-care, okay? And then when we're talking about well-being, okay, we have to think about that from a multidimensional standpoint, right? Because again, right, when I think about the Black women that I work with in particular, right, uh, very successful, doing very well in their jobs, in their career, right? Just killing it out there. Okay. But what about physical well-being? Right? What about your emotional well-being? Right? How are your relationships? Right? So sometimes we get focused on one area of self-care and we ignore some of the other parts, right? But we are whole people, we are connected people. And so if we ignore one area, it's likely to catch up in another area, right? And then we start to see problems across, right, our whole being. So self-care really is an area that we need to kind of slow down and really reflect on what it means, separate from, trending media, right, fixes. Okay. And then when we talk about stress-free, okay, usually people think of the absence of negative feelings, right? So we don't want to be worrying about things, no sadness, no frustration. We're not, dealing with illness, financial stuff, right? The absence of negative feelings. And then the opposite of that, right? Positive things. We want happiness, we want joy, we want peace, right? The easy life, the soft life. That's usually what we think about with stress free. Okay. And with smoke free, there's two components that I think that are important to talk about. One seems sort of obvious, right? It's the without smoke. Okay. Now, like you saw in the video, right, that without smoke really applies not just to me as an individual, because I may not be the one smoking, but someone else in the community, if they are, right, then it's not a smoke free environment, right? So without smoke, that part's pretty obvious. But the smoking is prohibited piece, the reason why I put that in there is because prohibiting smoking is very effective in creating smoke-free communities, right? But the approach to prohibiting smoking is a little bit more challenging when we're talking about individuals, right? Now, I don't know about you all. I can be a bit feisty. And the minute someone tells me, don't do something, what is it exactly that I want to do? Right? Soon as someone tells me, don't do that, that is exactly the thing that I'm like, well, maybe that resistance comes up, right? The challenge is a challenge. Don't tell me what to do, right? So it actually works against someone who is, considering stopping smoking to just say, just don't smoke, right? So very effective in terms of smoke-free environments, less effective approach with individuals who are considering stopping, right? Because it automatically sets up a power struggle, a challenge, and it's unrealistic, right? Each one of us can think of a behavior that we would like to change or stop or do something different. And if someone said to you, well, just stop. I mean, does that work? Does that help? Right? So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Okay. So I just wanted to sort of, bring that up. And then the issue of space, right? Smoke-free spaces. I really hope that people think broadly about space, right? Because we occupy a lot of different spaces that we all deserve to feel that we are, that we're seen, that we're considered, that we can have the right to be healthy, right? But that also we can all contribute to creating stress-free spaces that support healthy behaviors, right? And that support people in releasing behaviors that are maybe less healthy or less helpful. So think broadly about spaces, right? It could be your room at home, it could be the entire home, right? Or the entire community. It can be your workplace, the businesses and the stores that we go to, our outdoor spaces, community, and even our mental space is important in this conversation. Okay. So I put all that out there because I really want to kind of create a solid foundation about what it is we're talking about and encourage people to really think broadly about these topics and maybe see where you fit in this conversation, right? Maybe you really haven't taken the time to really think through intentionally about what self-care could look like that would promote your own well-being, right, in your home, right? Or in your workplace, right? So just kind of wanted to start with that. So I'm going to ask you all a question. Type in the chat and somebody will have to help me navigate the chat because I cannot see it. When were you last stressed? So type in the chat, 1, if you're stressed out right now. 2, if you've experienced stress within the last week. 3, if you experienced stress within the last month. Or 4, you know that you're about to head into some stress.
We've got some ones, some threes, and some twos.
1s, 2s, and 3s. Very good. Okay. And so, what does that tell you about stress?
We experience stress.
You're cutting out a little bit. I think you were saying that we all experience stress.
Right. We all experience stress at some
That's
point in
right.
time.
That is right. Yes. Right. So let's just get to it. Right. There is no such thing as a stress-free life. Right. We have to start there. Okay. Because what happens is we set out to create a stress-free life, and that is a setup. There's no such thing as a stress-free life. No evidence has ever been presented that suggests that that can ever be achieved, but stress can be managed, relieved, and lessened, but never eliminated. Okay. So, when we talk about different tips and techniques and things around creating, stress-free, um, you know, um, self-care spaces, I think that's really the first step, is shifting our lens around our relationship, or how we see stress and how we see coping behaviors. Okay. A place of non-judgment and a place of compassion that says that stress is a normal part of life. Most of us want relief from stress, right? A lot of times it doesn't feel good. And so, of course, who wants to stay in a space of not feeling good? So, we all find ways, we all do things to relieve that stress. And many of the coping behaviors that we see, included, but there's a lot others, right? Begin or are maintained as a way to relieve stress and to regulate our systems. Okay. And so the minute we look at someone who may choose smoking as their way of release, right, we fail to look at the things that we also do. We all have ways in which to cope, right, which is basically a way to relieve our stress. Okay. Whether they're healthy or not, helpful or not, we have to understand that we all do things for a reason. Okay. Now, but we also have to keep in mind that our environment can either increase or reduce the stress, right? Now, one of the frameworks that I use for understanding how we can respond to stress are the 4 A's, okay? So the first one, we've already sort of started talking about it, right? The sense of acknowledging it, okay? So, as you can tell, my approach is very, humanizing, validating, normalizing of stress, and the ways in which we cope. And so, another step of that is that we realize that stress is primarily a physiological response to any sort of demand, any sort of request on our systems, on our bodies, on our mental capacities, right? Anything that asks us to do something, right? Our body responds. Okay, that's really what stress is. Okay, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do about that. Okay, and in fact, if we ignore the fact that stress exists, right? That if we try and avoid the stress or putting off the stress, that actually is what contributes to the impacts that we see. Okay, so our stressors, when we ignore them, when we don't acknowledge that they exist, right, they get worse. They cause physical problems, psychological problems, problems in our relationships, right? So avoiding things, trying to be stress free when we know that it actually is, right, a factor, doesn't actually help, right? Smoking in particular, as a way of coping, right, is a way to avoid stress, okay? But there are other things that people do to avoid stress, right? There's smoking, there's shopping. What do you think retail therapy is all about, right? We're stressed, we spend some money, we feel good, right? Food. Oftentimes people turn to food, right? Overwhelmed with something at work, argument in a relationship, right? Eat something or eat a lot of something that, maybe isn't the best choice, right? But afterward, you feel good, right? It's that numbing behavior, okay? But that numbing, right, and that desire to push away the stress and the negative feelings that come with that are very, problematic, okay? Look at this. Look at this slide here. When you see these images, drop in the chat for me, and then someone maybe can help read those off. Name some of the feelings that you see here. What do you think is being described or depicted in these pictures?
I see frustration.
Frustration. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I see,
Hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hopelessness.
Yeah. And the little
Bored.
girl looks like she's curious or she's in awe of something, or maybe she just got caught doing something. I don't know.
Mhm.
Boredom, pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Anger,
else?
frustration,
Yes. Anger.
pain.
Mhm.
Anxiety.
Yep. What else?
Well, ecstatic or happy.
Yep. They look like they're having a good time down there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yep. Anything
Yeah.
else?
Um,
Fear.
Fear. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Maybe loneliness.
Definitely loneliness.
Loneliness. Yeah. Overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, as you are looking at these pictures and as we're naming the different feelings that they might be experienced, what did you notice about sort of what came up for you, right? As you were hearing those things and seeing these experiences. And really, what do you notice about when these things show up in your life, right? How do you respond, right?
well, what I noticed about these feelings is that sometimes, on some days, I cycle through a number of these feelings. You
Yes.
know, I might start off happy and then my internet doesn't work. So now I'm frustrated because I
Right.
got to do a Zoom meeting or something like that. So cycling through the
Yes.
different feelings.
Yes. Very good. It's very good self-awareness to know that, yep, these things happen throughout the day. Yeah.
In the
Okay.
chat, one person said it made them feel empathy.
Feel empathy. Yes. Yeah. People are really going through a lot in any given moment, and we never know, right? And especially in the context of this conversation, sometimes what we see is the outward, right, manifestation of these feelings. We see someone engaging in some sort of behavior that for whatever reason we don't engage in or we don't think they should be engaging in it, but we don't know. We don't know what someone might be carrying on the inside. Anger, frustration, pain, loneliness, overwhelm, right? Boredom, right? Okay.
So, Dr. Mills, may I ask a
Yes,
question?
please. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'd like to know how do you or how should one distinguish between stress and distress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let me, can I get to that? I have that on another slide actually. That might
Oh,
answer
okay.
your question. Yes, we're on the same page. Uh-huh. Yeah. So let's bookmark that. But what I wanted you to think about with this slide in particular, again, is about that self-awareness, right? Like I'm a therapist, like that's half of what I do is help people kind of come to that self-awareness, right? Of what are the types of feelings that you are more or less comfortable in sitting with, or do you tend to push away, to try and avoid, try and just kind of move on to the next thing, okay? And what are the ways in which you do that? We identified some things earlier, right? The smoking, other substances, shopping, sleeping. Sometimes people are overwhelmed. They're like, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to go to bed, right? So check in with yourself around the areas in which you might also, avoid. And we're going to talk about an alternative to pushing away or avoiding feelings, right? Which is essentially what smoking and other behaviors do, right? They try and push those things away. And I also wanted to mention that the reason why I have the happiness on there is because happiness is also a strong emotion, right? Celebrations can be triggers to using smoking or any other, right, coping mechanism. So when you talk about, stress, distress, there's also what's called eustress, which is a positive feeling, right? So it's really any sort of feeling can be a trigger, right, to use some sort of substance. And again, I use substance in a very broad way. Okay. An alternative, okay, to avoidance of the feelings or numbing the feelings with food or smoking or shopping, right, is this concept called acceptance, okay? Now, hear me out on this one, because the way that acceptance is used in sort of everyday conversation is not what this acceptance is all about. All right. Now, this term acceptance comes from a theory called acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's one of the foundations for the ways in which I work with folks. Okay. And it's this idea of the word that they use is making room for. Okay. So we willingly and actively make room for difficult thoughts, feelings, urges, cravings, sensations, rather than fighting them, avoiding them, or even trying to change them. Right? Most of us encounter something, a thought that we might have, a feeling we might have, like, oh, don't think that, or I shouldn't think that, right? Or we try and numb it out, which is what we've been talking about with smoking and other ways in which we numb our feelings, right? But when we come from a space of, okay, right, like I'm feeling stressed out, I'm feeling lonely, I'm bored as heck in here, right? Whatever the feeling is, right? That we can just sit with it for a moment and allow it to be present, okay? Now, it's ironic because literally earlier today, I was sitting with a client talking about how she has been her decision to stop smoking. Okay. I mean, I couldn't have planned this any better, but she literally is talking about, yep, so it's the first of the year, I've decided that, I want to stop smoking. And she gave all the reasons, why she wanted to, to do that. And she was talking about what's been helping her. And she literally talked about how, before, if something happened in her life, she went straight to smoking. That was just autopilot, right? The automatic response, right? But she said, instead, what I'm doing is I'm just allowing the feelings to be what they are, right? Whatever it is, just allowing it to be, right? And so she would say to her, and she was saying that, at first it was uncomfortable, like, right? She's feeling the intensity of whatever it was that was going on, and it was uncomfortable. And then she said, but you know what? Eventually it passed, right? The feelings passed, right? The urge to smoke passed. She says it just went away. And she said, and then you know what? She said, I forgot that I even wanted to go smoke in the first place, right? And so, and what she also said was that, what felt like it was going to be a long process when she started that experience of just allowing the feelings to be without having to rush to numb them, right? She said it actually only took a few minutes. Okay. So sometimes in our mind, we say, oh, this feeling, this stressor is so big, it's so overwhelming that I have to do something to get rid of it. Right. But there's a power in that pause. Right. That's what she talked about, that pause between feeling, coping mechanism, right? The pause to just sit with it actually dissipated the intensity of the urge and the intensity of the feeling. Right. But I also want to make it very clear that acceptance does not mean approval. Okay, so if someone has done something to hurt you, and you're upset about it, you're angry, you're disappointed, right? Acceptance is not approving of the treatment that you've received. Acceptance does not mean that you give up on trying to make some changes in the situation or the relationship or in your response to it. Does not mean that at all. So I want to make that very clear, right? It's more about your relationship with your feelings, that you allow them to be there without turning to some sort of coping mechanism that actually isn't helpful or healthy, right? Because the other thing that we talked about was, should she choose to smoke, right? It may work in that moment, maybe, right? But the after effects, right? After it wears off, right? Those feelings, those problems, those stressors are still there. And the additional frustration of, wow, I engaged in a behavior that I really didn't want, to do. Okay. All right. Any thoughts or question? And I'm still holding on to yours about the different types of stress.
One thing you noted, we have in the chat, and I just was like, I felt the same way. I loved
Mm,
it. There is power in the pause. I love
mhm.
that. I mean, that statement alone, man, that could be a slogan. Uh, that's really powerful.
Right, right. Well, because it's only in that space that you can make that grounded, intentional, values-based decision about what you want to do, right? But if we just go from feeling to coping, you don't have that, right? But in that pause, you can say, all right, yeah, I acknowledge what I am experiencing. It's likely very valid that I'm feeling the way in which I'm feeling, right? But now, how do I want to respond in a way that honors my values, my health, my well being, right? There's power in that space, right? So, thank you. Any other thoughts or comments in there? I really love this approach, acceptance and commitment therapy. I find that when I use it with clients, especially those of us that are sort of always in these spaces of, particularly people from oppressed communities, right? We're always in this kind of like battle, the challenge, the push, right? The grind, that there's something about this space that just allows us to breathe a little bit, right? And allows us to be human, right? And to feel and still have some agency over over our lives and our well-being. So that's what I love about this approach, but that's a whole other conversation. So just wanted to add that. Okay, anything else in the chat or other comments?
No, we're all clear.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right. So I skipped over one slide because I'll just get to talking, and that's I used to be an instructor, and so that teacher still comes out in me. So, all right. So we're on the self-awareness part, or we're continuing on the self-awareness really, because I think there's a lot of empowerment in knowing who you are and who you want to become. So when we're talking about different types of stressors, and I started here because let's see here, stress can come from all sorts of places, right? And there's positive sources of stress and negative sources of stress, okay? But they both physiologically do the same thing to our bodies. And so they both need to be addressed, right? They need to be recovered from. We need to create space for our bodies to regulate, to calm down, to rest and recover, regardless of the type of stress. Okay. So, are there any sports parents or sports grandparents or sports aunties or uncles in the space? Yes.
Sports
Okay.
auntie, yes.
Okay. All right. What sport?
Well, my nephew played football.
Okay. All right. Tell me what it was like for you watching your nephew play football.
Well, I didn't get to go to a lot of his games, but I did get to see some of his videos and take him to different universities and colleges. It was
Nice.
very exciting, very thrilling, and I was just so excited for him and the opportunities that
Yes.
he had ahead of him
Right.
in, the sports activity.
Yes, exciting, right? Very good. Yes. And excitement does what? How do we feel excitement, right? Our heart rate kind of goes up a little bit. We get pumped up, right? That's a stress response. Physiologically, it is a stress response. Now, it's not the negative distress that we think about, but that is a form of stress. Other sports folks out there, sports aunties, mamas, grandmas, uncles,
Grandmama.
grandmama. Okay. What sport?
Baseball.
Baseball. Okay. You watched a lot of the games. You go to a lot of the games.
I watch them online.
You
Yes.
watched. Oh, okay. On Game Changer.
No, I have to watch them when their mother sends me a video.
Yes. Okay. And what's your experience watching those games?
Oh, excitement, pride.
Excitement.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, very good. So, one of my biggest sources of stress is softball. Okay. So I have three children. They have all played softball and soccer and basketball, but there's something about softball season in particular that is one of my top sources of stress. All right. Not because I don't like it, because I love it. It's so fun. It's so exciting. There's a lot of drama, both on and off the field. There's a lot that goes into getting there and staying there all day, especially during all-star season. These tournaments are all day, Saturday and Sunday. You get there before the sun is up. You get home when it's, almost 11 just to start over the next day, right? There's all the emotions of the kids and the sideline mom coaches. That's what I call myself, and the coaches themselves. That is a lot, okay? It's a blast, it's fun, but it's one of my top sources of stress, to the point where I'm exhausted by the end of the weekend. And do you know, I literally changed my work schedule because of softball, right? Because I realized I was so wiped out from the stress of the weekend that Mondays, I was way more tired on Monday morning than most people are on Friday afternoon, right? So I think it's really important that we, consider all the sources of stress that show up in our lives, because again, that's pointing to that whole physiological, right, aspects of stress, right, and that they all need to be, addressed. Because the other thing to think about is the way in which stress can be a trigger for coping mechanisms. Because where do the majority of the parents go after these long softball weekends? Right, the brewery, right? So that tells you something, right? That they're so wiped out, they've expended so much energy and emotion and drama and all the things that they're going to go wind down with a beer at the local, brewery. Okay. I also mentioned that because, again, I work with a lot of professional Black women who are out there doing all sorts of amazing, great things and enjoying their lives, but they're very full, right? And even though you enjoy something, you're doing it often and, out in the community, right? It is still taking a toll on your body, on your spirit, on your mind. And there needs to be that recovery period, right? Considered. Okay. All right. There was a question about stress versus distress. I didn't answer that directly, but did I answer your question? Is there more that you were thinking about with that?
Well, this is Dr. Beard. I asked a
Yes.
question about the difference
Yes.
because, first of all, I agree that, stress is something that we all experience, and um, it's just a normal part of life. You're not going to ever be without stress.
No.
And so I think about stress on a continuum,
Yes.
moving from stress to distress. And
Yes.
so I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts around, that kind of continuum in
Yes.
terms of when would it be appropriate to intervene, if
Mhm.
you're working with someone.
Yes. Well, yes, we can definitely work with that continuum idea and really go from eustress to distress, right? Because it's all stress, right? It's all life happening and that we are responding to on some level. So whether it's the eustress, which is the positive, the fun softball tournament, to distress, which could be some of the things that we see, on here, and I have a slide in terms of community stress, right? There can be that continuum. And in my opinion, we need to be mindful of both prevention and intervention for any source of stress, right? So whether it is, you know, dealing with the positive stress of softball, right? So how can I prepare myself in advance for what's going to be a long weekend, right? How am I going to take care of my basic self-care needs during the weekend, maybe making sure we're properly hydrated, have the right, foods, not just eating junk from the snack shack, right? So prevention and intervention and building in the recovery, which is, do we really need to go to the brewery after this to kind of settle down? Or can we, take a quick walk? Can we meditate? Can we just go to bed? Right?
Mm-mm.
So, all the way to the other end, if it's, dealing with, conflict, in a relationship, right? Well, okay, how about the prevention part is this a healthy relationship that I even need to be in? Right? And do I need to set some boundaries or end the relationship, create some distance? Right? So anywhere along there, I think we need to be both mindful up front, right? To reduce the impact of the stress and then also to intervene when it has happened and the recovery afterward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And some of the people that
Yeah.
I work with people who smoke
Yes.
too, and that their distress comes from working, say, second or third shift, so their circadian
Yes.
cycle
Rhythm is
is
off.
off. And
Yes.
so, in terms of self-care, sometimes it's challenging because, they're working at night and whatnot. So,
Yes.
um, I
Mhm.
think um, that's a situation that sometimes it can be
Yeah.
difficult to even practice good self-care because
Right.
your sleep cycle is interrupted.
Yes. Very true. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's again why I say to people that self care is an individual thing. So, what works for me and my schedule may not work for someone else, but everyone can find something that does work for them, right? I have a colleague that used to say reality is the best defense, right? So we're like, well, I can't do this because of that, well, that doesn't work because of this. Okay, great. What does work? What can work for you, right? And sometimes we have to be creative, as well as let's see here, um, you know, simple, right? Sometimes we want to make it complicated. There has to be this complicated self care routine, or, that we have to do something that social media tells us, right? But it's like, what is the one thing for you that would make a difference, right? Even if it's such, sometimes I tell people, what will just turn the dial down just a notch or two? Let's just start there, right? So, and there's so many resources out there now to help with stress, with nervous system regulation. There are so many apps out there now that can help. And so, especially when their sleeping rhythms are off, a brief meditation, right, can be very effective. Now, sometimes people have preconceived notions about what meditation is, and there's all sorts of types of meditations, right? There's just kind of music and sounds. There are guided meditations that work better for people who have a hard time sort of slowing down their own thoughts, because with the music, they can still hear their thoughts pretty loudly, and it's hard to kind of turn that off. But with a guided meditation, they can focus on the words of the person that's speaking, right? That can sort of silence some of their thoughts. There's walking meditations for folks that are like, it's hard for me just to sit still. So there's just like, the one foot in front of the other sort of thing. So, you know, all that to say, right, there are options, I think, for each person and each situation if we kind of take the time to be creative and open. So, yeah.
I know I'm challenged when it comes to spending time in front of the screen, the blue light.
Yes.
I sleep much better if I would just shut my computer down because all through the night I'm tempted to, I'll get a thought or something. And so I'm spending too much time on the screen. I know this in my
Yes.
head, but
Right.
so
Right.
that's kind of like my challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And folks like us, the TikTok scrollers all
Yeah.
night and fall asleep. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's watch the judgment, right? I mean, you're doing it for a reason, and let's check in with, why, right? Like, why is that the go to, right? Like what's behind that? Like we looking at things from the behavioral level, we're going to miss something. So let's bring it down a level. Why is that the go-to? What are the other options, right? That will still address whatever the reason is that we're going, right, to the scrolling. Is it afraid you're going to miss out on something? Okay, well, talk yourself through. Ain't nothing that big going to happen between now and when I wake up in the morning that I need to be scrolling through my phone. If it's a real emergency, that person will call me directly. I'm not going to see it on whatever's on TikTok at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So we can talk ourselves through that instead of just like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that, that's terrible. That doesn't support behavior change, right? But it's like, okay, what else is going on here, and how else can I address that, right? And then the behavioral things, well, let me go put it over there far away from me because it's really cold right now, so I'm not going to get out of my warm covers to walk across the room to get the screen, right? So there's ways around some of that. So, all right. Any other comments or anything in the chat? How am I doing on time? Let's see here.
We are good. We're right at 7:02.
Okay, we're going until we're pretty good. Okay. All right. Any other comments or anything in the chat? Okay. Let's see here. Where are we? So let's see here. Acute stress, chronic stress, and episodic stress. Acute stuff, short-term reactions to immediate challenges, right? And there's so many things could fall under that. The examples on here are traffic jams and presentations, right? I mean, sure. Did this presentation cause me stress? Sure. Is it negative stress? No. Is it long-lasting stress? No, but it got my heart rate going. I had to do some extra things and, present, and who knows who's going to be there. Acute stress, right? Short-term, immediate in the moment, but kind of peaks your cortisol, and then you kind of move through it, right? But there can be acute stress can be very mild, like just doing a presentation, but it can also be very severe as well, right? Say that traffic jam was a result of a car accident, right? That's significant acute stress or severe acute stress, right? Then you've got the chronic stress. I have a slide about that, particularly for the Black community. Prolonged stress, ongoing issues, things that aren't easily resolved or resolved quickly, or are things that you have to deal with, over the lifetime, right? Very serious health implications, right? And especially early on, when you talk about children witnessing or experiencing abuse, right? That's a chronic stress situation that affects brain structure, right? So when people talk about, oh, well, kids aren't impacted, they don't know what's going on, they are actually the ones who are most impacted from chronic stress because of the stage of their development, right? And then episodic stress, again, I think about my, high performing, clients, right? Busy jobs, high demands, constant demands, and maybe it could be cyclical, but they're kind of always on, always have things going on. And it may be fun, exciting, exhilarating, but it's also quite stressful. It's a lot of demand on the body, on the mind, on the heart, right? And can lead to other issues like you see here, okay? And then you have the overlap, right? That people could be experiencing both chronic stress and episodic stress. I think about my high functioning, high achieving, clients who are dealing with the chronic stress of racism, sexism, right? As well as a high demand job, right? And so each of these types, I've talked about this concept of recovery time. There's a book called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And they talk about how we often get to the height of the stress, whatever the stressful experience is, right? And then we move right into something else without ever allowing our bodies physiologically to calm down, to relax, to re-energize, and to renew, okay? Community stressors in the Black community, right? Racism, microaggressions, vigilance. the disparities in the healthcare, housing, and safety, intergenerational trauma and grief, right? As well as just interpersonal trauma as well, right? The pressures on top of all of this to be strong and to keep it all together, to not lose it, to not really say how angry and hurt and frustrated, we are. That is a lot of pressure, right? It can create almost that pressure cooker effect, right? Um, and so so it's like no wonder we go to some of the ways to cope that we do, because this is an inhumane amount of things that we're asked to endure, right? And it's important for us to identify those things. There's a resource that some of you might be interested in. It's relatively new, and it's called Out of the Fire. And it's a book by Jennifer Shepard Payne. I should have written it in the resources, but it's called Healing Black Trauma Caused by Systemic Racism Using Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And that's the approach I was telling you about earlier. And so she has a number of exercises in that book where we can really identify the areas of stress in our lives as African Americans, that we can find ways to to respond in a way that, again, right, promotes our well-being, that maintains our dignity, right, that validates our experiences, right? So it's a resource you might want to check out. Again, it's called Out of the Fire, and is by Jennifer Shepard Payne.
Mims, you mentioned a couple of things that have kind of
Yes.
resonated for me, like yes, watching my nephews uh, play. I'm generally getting video clips, or I know they've had a game, and I'm going to talk to them after that game and find out whether they won or whether they didn't win. And so I'm like, it's not really my stress. It was they were playing the game, but I was just stressed for them for
Yep.
how I would hear that response. And I
Yeah.
think this is the same as far as the community, knowing community members are going through things, knowing um, there's things that we can do things about, and there's things that we really can't longer term. Like how does um that kind of play into chronic stress? And then the other piece was you mentioned children experiencing chronic stress.
Yeah.
How do we deal with the children having stress from watching us be stressed out?
Right. Yes. Well, collective stress, community stress has ripple effects. And one of the best ways that we can help the children,
Mm.
right, is by what? Managing our own stress. And there's a couple of ways in which we can do that. One is to name it, right? Because the kids they see what's going on. Sometimes they see more clearly than we do, right? So we have to, one, slow down enough to recognize it and acknowledge that it's happening, whatever the it is, right? Because so oftentimes we just get into let me just kind of push through mode, and we're not taking the time to acknowledge what is happening and how it's impacting us. And then the kids are saying, "Why are you acting like that?" Right? Because we're not aware of how we're being impacted. So we need to first slow down, recognize what's going on. Two, we need to name it for ourselves and name it for the children. The children do not have the vocabulary yet to name what's going on. They, their brain development, right, isn't at the place where they kind of put it all together. So then they're left to make sense of it on their own, but they're not developmentally able to do that yet. So we have to help them understand what's going on, right? And then we have to model that for them, right? Because so our kids learn to respond to life by watching us and those around them. So if we want them to be better, do better, feel better, have better health outcomes, we have to model how to do that. right? I mean, we talk about, we talk about strong Black woman syndrome. Well, where did we learn that from? Where did we learn to just push through stress and we got to handle it all ourselves? Well, we learned it from our mamas and our grandmamas and our aunties, right? Now, certainly there's some historical stuff too that were before we had no choice but to do that. I get that. But now we've internalized that and we're continuing to do it. And then, right, our children are still seeing that and thinking that that's the way that we have to deal with the things that life throws at us. So, again, right, like working with kids, it's about, well, what's going on with the with the mamas, the daddies, the aunties, the grandmas, the uncles, right? We have to do something different in order for them to know that there are other options.
Thank
Right?
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a hand raised.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Keith. How you guys doing? I'm sorry I'm late. I got the times mixed up.
Hey, no
Um,
worries. You're here.
I love the topic that you're talking about, Tiffany, and I'm actually trying to work on it, addressing it. I have a question for you.
Yes.
One of the things that I feel like is that, you know, Black people or people of color cannot thrive just because we're under so much stress
Yeah.
that we're constantly in survival mode.
Yes.
So when you're in survival mode, you can't be in survival mode and thriving at the same time. So one of the things that I've tried to do, I haven't implemented it yet, but I created an app. It's called
Ooh.
Just Be, and what it does is it helps students to monitor how often they're doing activities that release other chemicals, such as oxytocins or endorphins. So, for instance, they might check a box if they walk, or they might check a box if they get 7 hours of sleep. So what I'm trying to do is, because we can't eliminate that chronic stress, but we can train students to uh, to have a routine to
Yes.
combat that on a daily basis, because we can't avoid the stress, no matter if you're rich, poor, whatever. I mean, it's always there. So I just want to get your opinion on that. I'm trying to actually incorporate it in the classroom where students get extra
Oh,
points for homework or something if they're doing those activities. Because I feel like if it starts a habit, it's actually a way to get them into the thriving mode. Because once you start thriving, you don't want to let it go. So I really want to try to figure out how to make them let that stuff go. And we call that, when you say internalize, we call that trauma bonding. We're saying they're bonding with
yes.
the trauma, accepting it as normal, and continuing it
Oh my
on with it.
goodness.
I think that's why we drink and smoke and those types of things, because we bonded with those activities.
Yes.
Can you give me
Yes.
your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, I mean, can you just keep talking? Right? Exactly. Everything that you're saying is great. So everyone write that down. The app, we can find that
I'm
where?
just beta testing it right now.
Okay.
I have not, made it available, but I plan to this year.
Yes. Okay. All right. Yes. So so what you started with is hard to be in survival mode and thrive at the same time. Right. And so, I don't know at what point you hopped on. I can't see all the screens, but I was talking earlier about this approach, acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's so there's this part where they talk about choice point, right? And at any given moment, we have the option to live out a particular value, whatever that is, right? And so, one thing that I might say to young people, especially, is like, okay, in this moment right here, what action, what activity, what behavior will take you in the direction of surviving or thriving, right? Because you're right, like we don't have control over everything, we don't have control over a lot of things really, but what we do have more influence on is how we choose to respond. So I can choose to respond to whatever stressor is coming at me in a way that either moves me in the direction of just survival mode, right, which sometimes can look like, well, I'm just going to go and drink what I need to drink in order for me to get to the next day, right? Or if I want to move in the direction of thriving, what is going to help me thrive? Is it going to, and it could be different in any different situation. We get to choose, but is it speaking up and using my voice and saying, you know what, the way that you talk to me is not okay. And if we're going to remain in a relationship, then right, this has to change. Is it going to be, you know what, I'm going to go home, I'm going to do some deep breathing, I'm going to journal or do some art, around this, right? So that's one thing that I would say, even in the face of oppression, we have a choice. Am I going to respond in a way that keeps me in survival mode or thriving? The other thing that you said that I think is very important, is, making things a habit. Okay, so I think it's very unfair when we tell people stop doing something, but then don't give an alternative, right?
Mhm.
So we can't take away everyone's our coping mechanisms if we haven't found something else that is going to help. And so when you talked about doing things that stimulate other sort of hormones, right, like oxytocin, so like that's the love and like the warm fuzzies and the positivity and the happiness, right? Finding other things to do that, right? So being in community, for example, right? A lot of the schools now, I don't know if you know, a lot of the schools now have like therapy dogs, right? So being able just to pet the therapy dog, right? So and so another thing you were talking about is like having people get used to feeling good, right? And then wanting that. And it's a different sort of feeling good. Feeling high is different than those sort of, that inner joy and that inner peace that I think a lot of us need to experience. But it's uncomfortable sometimes if we're not used to it. Um, my mother and I have this debate sometimes. My mother is 80, almost 83, and she still works pretty much full time and loves it, and that's fine. And I think that's great. But we have this joke, and she talks about how she hates it when psychologists start out workshops with some sort of meditation or visualization, some sort of moment of, just peace and quiet. But I'm like, Mom, and on the one hand, you talk about being so busy and needing to slow down and wanting to take a break. And the minute someone gives you the opportunity to slow down and breathe, you're like, oh, come on, I don't got time for this. We got to just get to business, right? Because just even that feeling alone of just like, whew, calm, breath, relaxation is so unfamiliar. She can't even sit in it, right? So it sounds like in part what you're wanting to do with your students is give them a different experience and have them get used to that as opposed to the ways in which we avoid other experiences and feelings. So I don't know if that addresses all of your question, but those are the things that came up.
Yeah, that
For
does. Thank you so much. I just
yeah,
wanted to get your opinion on that, if that was uh, scientific or,
yes, yeah. Yeah. And, once they start to identify and become more aware of these other emotional experiences that they can have or other ways that they can stimulate endorphins, then they're more likely to engage in those things. But if they don't know because they haven't seen or been taught or given those experiences, right? They're going to be seeking the things that they do see and that they know work because smoking works, drinking works, over shopping works, right? So, other thoughts, questions? Let me see what else I wanted to cover because I know now we're getting close to time. Um, let's see here. Let me just briefly go over this one here. How do you know when you're stressed? Right? Like, what does it look like? When do you know when you're stressed? And when do you really notice it? Right? Because what often happens is we know when we're stressed when things are kind of bad, right? They're like, oh, I must be stressed out. But oftentimes there are early signs that we miss, right? And it's so much easier to intervene or to manage stress earlier in the process, right? And then the other question to sort of ask yourself is when I do actually notice or realize, or someone points out to me that I'm stressed, when do I actually do something about it? Right? There's this concept that I talk to people about on deferred maintenance, where it's like we keep putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, right? And then by that point, it becomes more costly, right? Costly physically, emotionally, financially, right? Than had we dealt with it earlier on. And so a lot of times when you see things like this, where they talk about signs and symptoms of stress, if they've gone to this point, right, there may have been some signs along the way that you may have been, missing, right? And so when I talk to folks about smoking or other sort of substances or coping behaviors, it's like, okay, what are some of those earlier signs? Because if you wait until you are so overwhelmed that the only thing you can think to do to kind of get out of that space is smoke, right? It's going to be hard to not engage in that behavior because you're so overwhelmed physiologically, mentally. It takes a lot of cognitive energy to make a different decision, right? So don't set yourself up to try and change a behavior or stop doing something when you're at your worst, right? Instead, let's notice and recognize the earlier signs. And that's when it's going to be easier to say, you know what? I'm not going to, right, turn to the alcohol or the smoking or the shopping, and instead I'm going to do journaling or painting or dancing or whatever the case may be. Okay.
One thing I found is I started finding myself locked in the garage because I saw my keys on the counter, but I walked by them and I didn't actually pick them up. Or I left my phone, which I saw it and I thought I went to pick it up and put it in my bag, but I didn't. And so when I get into a habit of starting to forget things, then I start
Right.
realizing my plate is too full.
That's right. Yeah. Uh-huh. I always think about it as my cup is so full, and if I keep pouring more things in, stuff is going to spill out the sides, right? Yeah. Forgetting is definitely one. Yeah. Good. Good.
I find that it's not that I get stressed. Um, it's it's when I feel like I don't have control.
Mhm.
Like if I'm in overwhelm, that can be stressful, but it doesn't stress me as long as I believe or I know I can control it or manage it. But
Yeah.
when things seem to be out of my control,
Yeah.
that's when I'll get, to start feeling stress. And I first feel it physically, like, my heart might race. And then
Yes.
emotionally, I will get irritable and I lose my verbal filter. I want to say things that I shouldn't say. So,
Yes.
Verbal filter. That's a good one.
I
right.
love it.
So I have to calm myself down and say, you're just stressed, be nice in your world, don't take out on other people. So that's what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Well, yes. So sometimes it feels like things are out of our control, and reducing stress, like you see on the slide, isn't necessarily about controlling everything. But even in what you just said, right, we can reduce stress where possible, and that includes stressful people that push us to want to remove our verbal filter, right? But it's not just about, well, be nice, right? Or don't say anything. It's like, well, what can I say in this situation that still allows me to acknowledge how I'm feeling about it, um, and gives me some agency in how I want this to move forward, right? Because simply
Mhm.
keeping that verbal filter on and just, okay, be nice, let me just get through, I think that could actually increase the
Mhm.
stress, right?
Well,
That's that.
when I say be nice,
Yeah.
don't say, harsh things because they don't know what you're going through.
Yeah.
And another thing that I do is I kind of I call it a balance sheet. When my stress is due to disappointment, something has disappointed me. Now I'm stressed. So then
Yes.
I work real, my goal is to do something that makes me feel better or good to
Yes.
balance out this feeling that I have. And then again, maybe that's part of that control that I need in order to, so that's
Yeah.
how I'll manage it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. So what's something else that you can do that'll put you back in feeling in control of your own
Uh-huh.
space, your own feelings, your own, right,
Yeah.
your own
And
agency?
sometimes it's music or, um, pick up the phone and, call somebody that I enjoy talking to.
Yep.
And I don't necessarily share, this what's going on, but just talking
Yeah.
with them kind of
Yes.
takes me into a different space.
Yes. Exactly. Right. So that's on one of the slides I have coming up in terms of utilizing community support. That's what you're talking about. Let me talk to somebody. Let me connect with somebody. That's very important. So sometimes when people are trying to reduce or eliminate a certain behavior like smoking, they can often feel very isolated, right? There's sometimes a lot of shame and stigma around the behavior, so that they don't share with people when they're struggling, right? And so being able to go to someone and say, "This is where I'm at. Can you support me?" In this, I think can be very powerful. Yeah. So utilizing community. Mhm. Any other thoughts or comments?
I just have another thought, in
Yep.
that sometimes the stress, especially if you work in the nonprofit world, is just from taking care of other people,
Yes.
so much, because we do, feel their problems and the stuff that they're going through, even though we're not going through it. Sometimes it feels like you are,
Yeah.
because you're in the middle of it. And so I haven't figured that one out yet, but I do think what happens because of that is we take some of that stress that we have, and we carry it with us when we leave the job. So we're not actually in stressful situations, but we're in stressful jobs where we're forced
Yeah.
to examine and be in the middle of things, and respond to other people's problems. And then we leave, and then we have to, you know, come home, and then, you have to carry that with you for a little bit before you can let it go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's where the self care comes in, right? One of the things we were saying earlier is that the media will have you thinking that self care looks like this picture, right? It's all about getting your nails done, doing your facial things, but it can actually be a much deeper thing, and can cover a lot of different areas of your life. So it's like, what would self care look like for someone who works in a setting where a lot of folks are depending on them, or they're hearing a lot of hard, painful stories, right? What does self-care look like, and how can we plan for that in advance, during the day and after the day, right? Because so that's, again, it's that awareness. So you're identifying, hey, what are the typical stresses for me or in a particular environment, and given that, what can I do to take care of myself? Let me take care of the foundational stuff. Am I sleeping? Am I eating well? Am I, getting the rest, which is different than sleep? Rest is something totally different, right? Am I getting the exercise? Am I attending to all areas of my life? Am I getting the community support? Am I having fun? Am I getting, therapy, right? To help kind of process what I'm hearing at work, right? And do I have a solid plan for when I'm going to carve in that downtime, or completing the stress cycle, or right, balancing out the sheet, like was mentioned earlier, right? That's Those are the types of questions I think we need to think about, right? Because we can each talk about, and I'll end with this, um, we can each talk about all the stresses in life, because that is life. Stress exists, right? But the next step is, given that, what are the things that I can do, right, to take regular action to promote my own well being, right? And that's the level at which we can become much more effective at becoming smoke free in this context, right? For ourselves individually, or as our community, when we address how to respond to stress. So,
Yeah, can you give more detail on the rest versus sleep?
yeah. So, rest, sitting still, right? Just sitting still, you know, um, going out, sitting on the park bench, not having to go home and, do things, tidy things, clean up, do the laundry, right? Call the friend, scroll TikTok or whatever, right? Just resting. It's like, the NAP ministry, right? Trisha Hersey, the NAP ministry. I mean, just rest.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mims. I think we've all learned many things from your presentation tonight. You've given us encouragement saying that you're just even acknowledging that stress exists and that we're never going to get rid of all of it, but we can do things to, I would like to say, you can do things to make yourself better and not be just in survival mode. Um, is something I think that we all benefit from. So thank you so much for giving us your time this evening and the great feedback. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mims. This
Of
was really,
course.
really good.
Thank
I
you.
am going to show just a couple slides
Oh, let's see here.
for us to finish this out. I did place our evaluation in the chat so you all can see that. Hopefully you can see my screen that has also our save the date for our third annual Faith and Health Collaborative. It is coming up February 26th, so please save the date, mark your calendars for that. We will have a really good, we have some great speakers coming from the Center for Black Health and Equity, and also we have some American Heart Association media specialists and some of the campaigns that they have done that have reached out to younger people. And so we want to have that training. And then we also are going to be doing youth engagement training. It'll be a virtual workshop on March 9th, also again from 6 to 7:30, where we'll be working with diving into how do we get more students involved? How do we train more young leaders to be advocates for smoke-free communities? So we'll be looking to some of you all for your expertise on that. Hopefully this was a great evening for you. And we look forward to getting your feedback so that we can continue to have a very positive education series addressing the topics that you find helpful and meaningful in your lives. So thank you so much. Any other comments or anything someone else might want to share or offer before we say goodnight? If not, thank you all so much. Have a good evening.
Thank
Blues.
you, everyone. Good night.
Bye bye.